now time for the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. The Mike Wagner Show brings you famous celebrities and amazing people from all over the world. Listen online at themikewagnershow.com and on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And watch the interview on YouTube. So sit back and relax and enjoy the Mike Wagner Show.
Hey everybody, it's Mike from the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Looking for a professional website without breaking your budget? Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show. Get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on the MikeWagnerShow.com. Also, check our Facebook page, facebook.com/the Mike Wagner Show. Also, download and listen on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel on the Mike Wagner Show and take the Mike Wagner Show with you on any mobile device. We're here with Los Angeles author of Can't Give It Away on 7th Avenue, The Rolling Stones in New York City, currently available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. He also wrote 100 Entertainers Who Changed America, The Secret History of New York Blues, and Artifact Magazine. He's quoted in a number of sources in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Newsday, CNBC.com. He's been a frequent guest and a double major in film in English. And before we just get the ball rolling here, I'd like to welcome in live from Los Angeles, the guy who gets a lot of satisfaction talking about the Rolling Stones, Chris McKittrick. Chris, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining us today.
Mike, thanks for having me on, and thank you for that lead-in. It was way too kind.
Well, we do everything to make people at home. That's all I could say. It's our part of our job. So, okay, you have a book out called Can't Give It Away on 7th Avenue, The Rolling Stones in New York City, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You're also double major in film and English. You also got 100 Entertainers Who Changed America, also featured in Artifact Magazine, The Secret History of New York Blues. And before we get into all that, tell us how you got started in writing.
Oh, so, I entered college deciding I was going to be a filmmaker, because I grew up loving, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, James Cameron, all these movies. And I started taking a lot of film classes in college, and I still majored in film. And then also majored in English, because as I started working on films and trying to wrangle my friends to light my films and act in my films and help me do sound design and all those crazy things, I realized that I actually enjoyed writing about movies a lot more than I actually enjoyed making them. And so that sort of led me into writing about film, which is primarily what my background is. But of course, I'm a huge lover of music, and I've always been looking for a topic to write my, I've contributed so many magazines and websites with my writing on film and just general pop culture stuff. And I really want to find a topic to write music on. And I'm a native New Yorker. As you mentioned, I'm out here in sunny Los Angeles right now, but I'm a native New Yorker. And I'm a huge fan of the Rolling Stones. And growing up, I always wanted to know what was the connection between the band and New York City. They have so many songs that are about New York City. They have so many great concert history in New York City. They also have done so many big publicity stunts in New York City, whether it's rolling down Fifth Avenue in a flatbed truck to promote the 1975 tour, or having a blimp over the Bronx with the tongue logo on it to promote the Licks tour. So I really wanted to tackle that. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that there was a book there.
That was amazing, too. And how did you get in touch with the Rolling Stones about the book?
Well, I actually didn't speak to any of the members specifically, but I've been able to talk to people that have been involved with the band and a part of the band's organization. So that was really gratifying to talk to them about how this band has changed over the years. What was amazing, too, though, is having access to 50 plus years of interviews done by these band members. Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Ronnie Wood, Charlie Watts, Bill Wyman, who's no longer in the band, but having the access to their interviews and their autobiographies and all of their writing really made this book a joy to write, because so many of these interviews may have been done 35 years ago in a newspaper that were forgotten about. And being able to dig that out and bring it to light was really a lot of fun.
It sounds like a lot of fun too. So you just took all the interviews and you just put them all together. That's what it sounded like. And it's just amazing and very unique. And what would you say, what was your most favorite interview that you did some research on?
So I would have to say the best, and I guess I got to expand this to a book. Bill Wyman, who was the bassist for the Stones up until the Steel Wheels tour, after which he retired, he is just such a stickler about history and facts and things that happen. So first of all, his autobiography, Stone Alone, was just a fantastic resource. But his interviews were always great because he's very precise on the way things happened. Whereas other members of the band, their interviews, they can sort of play fast and loose with the facts sometimes. Sometimes the legend is better than the facts, you realize. So it was really, really helpful, to look at Bill Wyman's material, because he really seems to have everything on point.
And of course, too, you're talking about the interviews when you put them all together, like from the very beginning until now. And how do you see that evolving, like, say, from beginning to current as well, too, in terms of the band coming together, their viewpoints, and maybe get into politics or state of music and everything like that. So how do you see them evolving, like, from beginning to end when it comes to the interviews?
Well, what's really interesting about interviews of the members of the Rolling Stones, and I think it's more of a reflection of the interviewer than the interviewee. When you start looking at interviews, especially Richards, you realize that interviewers tend to ask them the same 12 questions over and over again. And, both with Richards, it's how did you survive so long? Tell us about your drug history. Tell us about the times that you and Mick weren't getting along. And with Jagger, it's usually about, tell us about this song. Angie, what girl was that about? Faraway Eyes, what girl was that about? Memory Motel, what girl was that about? And you kind of the humor in going over so many decades of Stones interviews is just sort of looking about how they respond to the interviewers and realizing, you feel like you're asking me a groundbreaking question, but this question has been asked of me 27 times before you. So I'll try to keep the answer as interesting as possible. One thing that I always find interesting when I was doing my research is that when the Stones would do these press conferences in New York City to kick off the tours, they did one before the Steel Wheels tour. They did one between the Voodoo Lounge tour. They did one before the Bridges to Babylon tour. They would usually get the same three questions. Is this the last tour? How much are tickets going to be? And are you sure this isn't going to be the last tour? We're just checking. And just seeing them answer those questions tour after tour after tour, as if the interviewer is asking them as if it's a unique, brand new question, and seeing the Stones shrug it off and saying, we're not going to tell you if it's the last tour. We're not going to tell you how many tickets are going to cost. We're not going to tell you what's going to be on the set list. So they almost had these anti-press conferences, which were kind of funny to observe when you're starting to look at them over the course of the years.
And I can imagine, too, saying they're playing acoustically, this could be the last time. It just made me think of it. When they say, the last time and everything else, I could see him breaking into song. It just rang through my head for some reason. So,
Right.
So we had that too. And of course, we'll get to more in the book in just a minute and some of his other works. Listen to the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at SonicWebStudios.com for all your needs. Looking for a professional website without breaking your budget? Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support@SonicWebStudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show. Get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on the MikeWagnerShow.com. Also, check our Facebook page, facebook.com/the Mike Wagner Show. Also, download and listen on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and also watch the interview on YouTube as well as subscribe to The Mike Wagner Show. And also, take The Mike Wagner Show with you on any mobile device. We're here with Chris McKittrick, the author of The Can't Give It Away on 7th Avenue, The Rolling Stones in New York City, now available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. We talked about the book for a little bit. He also wrote some other articles as well, too, and, kind of like a reviewer in a way as well, too. And I was going to ask you about the Stones as well, too. And, the common questions get often asked. They play around with it. Sometimes they get irritated. Now, what are some, like, the most unusual questions that have been asked, and how do they respond?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So one of the more interesting questions that the Stones tend to ask, and it's funny to say this because you think for a lot of people this would be the first question they ask, is when they get asked about their musical influences and their thoughts on music, because they've become such a pop culture phenomenon that often they're asked more about their history. How did it feel to play on the Ed Sullivan Show? How did you feel that when you had to change your lyrics? What was it like playing Shea Stadium 6 times in 1989? Asked about their career. So it's really enlightening when you can hear, like, for example, Charlie Watts, the drummer, talk about his opinions on jazz, because at heart, he's a jazz musician.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, he plays in the world's greatest rock and roll band,
Right.
but he grew up loving jazz and being a disciple of jazz. So some of my favorite interviews to watch of the Stones are like when Charlie Watts gets interviewed by like a drumming or a jazz outlet, because he gets to be able to talk at length about what he loves. And you don't see that as often, because more so people are trying to hit on a lot of the tell us about your history. And they more so, their history is so tied to the history of music, blues and jazz, that they'd rather talk about their influences than themselves.
Mm-hmm. That is amazing, too. And with some of the influences like Charlie Watts, it's like, there's some unique influences that kind of just say, that just blew you away.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So there's also, too, like with if you go in depth, how far you go back to the Stones, like, say, with Brian Jones before he overdosed, going back, or even like, say, when they first formed, was there anything about Brian Jones and, what was he like as a person, and how did he handle interviews? And, I have to say is like with Brian Jones that, just like, what was it like from an interviewer's perspective? Yeah,
well, what was interesting about Brian Jones, and certainly I've never had the opportunity to meet him. He was long gone before I was born. But what's interesting about Brian Jones is, from a musician standpoint, he was supremely talented. I mean, this is a guy that could pick up almost any instrument and play it. And if you look at some of the credits on those mid-'60s Stones albums, and you could just see the number of instruments that Brian Jones played, it's mind-blowing. But Brian Jones is very uncomfortable being in the spotlight of a world-famous rock and roll band. And even though Brian Jones is really the one individual that founded the band, I mean, he gave the band the name, the Rolling Stones, he very quickly on ceded, whether intentionally or unintentionally, sort of the leadership of the band to Jagger and Richards. And what's interesting is when you see some of those interviews, especially towards the end of Brian Jones's life, and I wrote about this in the book, how sometimes sad it is to see Brian speaking as if he's still the mouthpiece of the band, as if he's still the leader of the band, when by that time, he was barely contributing to the albums. TV appearances, he was put in the way back of the presentation. So, Brian Jones is interesting. He just never seemed comfortable in that aspect of being a rock star. But there's been many rock stars that have fit that mold where, they're supremely talented, but just very uncomfortable talking and being in front of the camera and giving an interview about themselves.
Mm-hmm. That sounds amazing too. Like with Brian Jones, and also you also touched on some of the others, like say with New York City, like say with some of the interviews, like, what are some of the places like they go to eat, like, or relax, or, do something just to get away, like maybe some of the things we don't know about what the Stones have done according to the book.
Well, that was really fun to write about because, especially in the late 70s, early 80s, when Jagger, Richards, and Ronnie Wood all lived in New York City, it was really interesting to read about all the places that they would hang out, have fun at. Jagger is often thought of as the member of the band who tries to be the most cutting edge, and and was associated in the late 70s with such as Studio 54. But it's actually funny that there are Keith Richards has a much deeper history with Studio 54 than Mick Jagger does. You wouldn't really think of Richards being the one that has that, but Richards met his wife Patty Hansen at Studio 54. He also got to hang out with a lot of the members of the Saturday Night Live cast, and we're talking about the original Not Ready for Primetime Players. Dan Aykroyd had a bar that he owned. It was not exactly a legal bar, but he had a bar that was in Manhattan that was called the Blues Bar. Because he was a member of the Blues Brothers there. Mm-hmm. And Jagger and Richards would come by that bar and hang out with the Not Ready for Primetime Players cast. And then, of course, the Stones did appear on Saturday Night Live for only one time. And Jagger's been on a couple times as himself, but the Stones only appeared one time in 1978 in a very notoriously sloppy performance because they were probably having a lot of fun with the cast before they went on to perform.
or sometimes you think they had too much to drink, or there's like, we'll just lip sync and get out of there. So I guess it sounds like they didn't take it too serious as people would thought they would. So I mean,
I think they had a little too much partying before the performance. Definitely look it up. It's online, their Saturday Night Live performance, and it is still wild, but it's not the Stones at their best, and I think they'd freely admit that.
And of course, it makes you wonder, how did Lorne Michaels take this as well too when they saw the Stones, being so sloppy on Saturday Night Live? Makes you wonder about Lorne Michaels, the producer.
You know what? I'm sure they still got a lot of ratings that night, so probably was still happy. And you know what? You don't tell the Rolling Stones what to do. So if the Rolling Stones want to show up on Saturday Night Live and play a little sloppy, you'll let them do it.
There you go. I have to say I'm getting satisfaction out of this one here too. So, all right, we'll talk a little more about the book in just a minute and some of your influences. You listen to the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at SonicWebStudios.com for all your needs. Looking for a professional website without breaking your budget? Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960, or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show, get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios, take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on the MikeWagnerShow.com. Also, check our Facebook page, facebook.com/the Mike Wagner Show. Download and listen on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Also, subscribe to the Mike Wagner Show on YouTube and coming soon to Anchor FM, Libsyn, Apple, and Google, and more. Also, don't forget to take the Mike Wagner Show with you on any mobile device. We're here with author Chris McKittrick, the author of Can't Give It Away on 7th Avenue, The Rolling Stones in New York City, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And plus, he's also written some others like Wrote 100 Entertainers and Who Changed America and Secret History of New York Blues in Artifact Magazine. Now, I'm going to connect those two in just a minute here. And this also came to mind with the Stones being in New York City, going to Studio 54 and other places. And you mentioned Jagger and Richards going to 54. What about the likes of Ron Wood, Charlie Watts, and Bill Wyman? Where do they hang out when it came to, similar to Studio 54?
Well, what's really interesting about, and I'll start with Charlie Watts because it was so much fun writing about him in the book because out of all of the Stones, Charlie Watts is the one that was most excited to first visit New York when they first got here in 1964. And we also have to kind of keep in mind, nowadays a band will fly all over the world performing wherever. That didn't quite happen in 1964 until, Richards writes about it in his book Life, that the idea of him ever playing music and going to America just seemed impossible. Like, how would that ever happen? Because there's very few musicians that were actually able to go transatlantic in that before the Beatles, before the Stones. So Charlie Watts, being this great lover of jazz, was the one that was most excited to visit New York. And there's just great stories of that during those early to mid 60s tours. When they would visit New York, the first thing Charlie Watts would do was find the nearest jazz club, because this is where so many of his heroes were playing in Manhattan jazz clubs. And these were people that he grew up loving and admiring and being influenced by, and being able to actually see them in the flesh was just amazing to him. In terms of Ronnie Wood actually had his own place down in the Village at one point called Woody's in the Village.
Woody's in the Village,
restaurant.
appropriate.
Yeah. And it only lasted a few years, but that was his joint. And so he definitely loved being there when he was around.
Mm-hmm. And I think you also mentioned Bill Wyman too. I don't know if we got to that. And where did he like to hang out?
Bill Wyman's an interesting character in terms of he's more of the cerebral type. He spent a lot of time in hotel rooms with girls, but also not as much as a partier as the other members of the bands were. So he was more so a guy that you'd find him in the closest art museum rather than partying down in the city. Probably pick up a girl while he was touring, but the museum. But that's more like his style.
Mm-hmm. That sounds amazing too, and how they all come together like that. And of course, talking about some restaurants and maybe like, the places that they're seen at, like what's some of their favorite restaurants they like to hang out at in New York City?
Well, that's changed a lot since they've been coming for 50 years at this point, 55 years. So many of these places have opened, closed, and so forth. I mean, it's if you look at the list of the places where the Stones have hung out or been, the list is it's a list of legendary places. I think probably the most important, the key one is a place called St. Mark's Bar, which is actually featured prominently in the Waiting for a Friend music video.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So if you watch that music video, which was filmed in New York City, the band actually meets up at this bar, St. Mark's Place, and they hung out there, had a drink. The word got out that the Stones were at this bar. Obviously pre-social media days. This is 1981, but they were just swarmed by people, and this was an example of where they hung out. But another great thing is when you look at the history of the Stones in New York City, is looking at a lot of these legendary places that sometimes, especially in the late 70s, early 80s, when Jagger and Richards lived in the city, all these places that they would just jump on stage and start playing with the band that's on stage. No one's going to tell Keith Richards you can't come and play guitar with us. So there's records of Keith Richards going to play at CBGB's with a band. There's records of Keith Richards jumping on stage on the Bitter End. All these legendary New York City clubs that Jagger or Richards would jump on stage and just do a song or two because they happened to be there that night.
That is amazing too, and how they can just get up there and just doing their stuff. And also like when it comes to bars, I don't know if this was touched upon the interviews and everything. What were their favorite drinks? I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, that definitely changed over time. I mean, it's very hard to see Keith Richards without. In the 70s, it was mostly Jack Daniels, and usually out of the bottle. He changed to Rebel Yell later on in the 80s. He actually has said that he's quit drinking, which I don't quite believe, because I just saw a picture of him with a beer in his hand. So maybe it was NA beer, but that's what he says. And in terms of Jagger, I don't know what his particular drink is. I just think he likes a good time, so he might go with the flow.
Mm-hmm. That sounds amazing too. It makes you wonder about Charlie Watts. What does he have?
Oh, I have no idea what Charlie Watts would drink. That's a question I don't have an answer for.
That's okay. You figure have a good time, and about New York City as well too. And of course, you also were featured in Artifact magazine, wrote the secret history of New York blues. You can just tell us a little bit about that as well too, since we're on the subject of New York.
Yeah, so that's kind of what led me to write about the Stones in New York because, we think about blues, which is such an American music form. Couple of places pop into your mind: Chicago, Memphis. But as somebody who loves the blues, and I would dig into some of those really early blues recordings. Some of the first blues recordings were done in the 20s and the 30s. And you realize that so many of these early blues recordings were done in New York City because that's where all the recording facilities were. There were not recording studios available, and certainly any field recordings were done like sort of the Robert Johnson style, which is kind of a one recorder, one microphone somewhere record. If you want to record in a recording studio, you had to go to New York City. So many of these great early blues records were actually recorded in New York City. So New York, why it's more so thought of as a jazz city, has such a great pedigree of blues music that often doesn't get acknowledged because we think of, again, Chicago and Memphis blues over New York City.
That's something as well too. You talk about New York blues, and where some of the other prominent artists and also other recording, and maybe a little bit more about New York blues before we get to your next article about 100 entertainers who changed America.
So one thing that I found so fascinating about recording blues in New York City is because nowadays we think of the recording industry being based in Los Angeles, or really wherever you have a computer that has a good connection now, you can record studio quality material. Studios just didn't exist like that in other areas. So many great blues musicians were thinking like Big Maybelline and a lot of these early blues greats. When the Levy Breaks, the first version of that was all recorded in New York City because that was where these artists could record something that could be played throughout the country and be reproduced. Of course, as has done with the history of music, many of these artists were poor, African American, or other minorities, so they didn't quite sign the greatest deals because this was the reality of the world at that point. And so that was kind of the sadness about writing my articles, to find that so many of these great musicians write these songs that have been recorded by so many other blues artists, including the Rolling Stones, and Led Zeppelin, of course, when the Levy Breaks. That is a perfect example of artists that didn't quite get their due, but luckily their music lives on, even if they weren't compensated for it in their time.
And what are some of the early blues artists that in New York City that have actually made such a big influence? You talk about Robert Johnson and also a couple of others, and maybe some others that are lesser known, but that had a major impact, like say on the Stones, Led Zeppelin, or even a Who, or like in today's music.
Yes. So Robert Johnson, I mentioned him, but he didn't record in New York City. But so many of the musicians that did record in New York City, and again, we're talking about Big Maybelline, we're talking about I got someone on the tip, Blind Willie Jefferson, so many of these great musicians that were out of the city, obviously had no connection with New York City. This gave them their opportunity to record their music in a professional environment, which they wouldn't have had where they started.
That is something too. You also wrote the 100 entertainers who changed America, and maybe just name off a few as well too.
Yeah, so I actually contributed a few of the entries into it. I didn't write the whole compilation. So the people that I wrote about were in that book. I did several entries. One of them was Jim Henson. I'm a big fan of the Muppets. I can't see
Oh,
how you could not
yes.
be. I cannot see how you could not be a fan of the Muppets. If I've ever met anyone who didn't like the Muppets, I don't know what to do with them. But I wrote about Jim Henson, who obviously changed the way Americans look at puppetry and the limits of it, or not the limits of I would actually say the opposite. What puppetry could accomplish. I also wrote about Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who created Superman. Especially nowadays, you look at almost every movie that tops the box office has some kind of superhero involved. But Superman was really the first superhero, and that was created by two guys that just coming up with an idea for a comic strip character that later became a comic book when they couldn't sell it as a comic strip. I wrote about Billy Wilder, who was a phenomenal filmmaker, who directed so many great movies, some of my favorites like Sunset Boulevard, and really sort of pushed the limits of what Hollywood allowed filmmakers to do in those times in terms of censorship. Really pushed the envelope. And I also wrote about, being a New Yorker, Howard Stern, who really changed the face of how radio is broadcasted in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
And I'm did I do one more? No, I think that was it.
That was it. Wow, you got yourself a nice handful that made impact. That was just amazing. I mean, I couldn't think of anybody else. I mean, you just hit the nail right on the head on a lot of those people.
Yeah.
And of course, you've been in writing for quite some time, and also want to ask you, like, who your favorite writers, your favorite authors, and also you talk about music, like, say, who's some of your favorite singers. You talked about Sunset Boulevard, and some of your favorite shows and actors as well too. So talk about some of your favorites and what influenced you today.
Well, obviously, I'm a huge fan of the Rolling Stones. That's no question. I wrote a book about them. But I also have to say, in terms of music, I'm a blues guy, but more so blues rock. And any rock band that has sort of an influence of the blues, I'm a big fan of. So, of course, stuff like Led Zeppelin. But I also love bands that don't sing about the blues on their sleeve, but really have that sort of influence. And I have to say, one of my all-time favorite bands is AC/DC, and I really don't think they get the credit for being great musicians that they are. I mean, a lot of people think of them having the same sound for every song, but they really tap into the blues roots, that John Lee Hooker style blues, rhythm and blues that they don't quite get the credit for. In terms of writers, fiction-wise, I'm a big admirer of Raymond Carver, who only lived to 50 years old, but he was just an incredible short story writer. As a guy that writes articles, and I mainly write nonfiction, I always love the idea of someone being able to capture a story in 20, 50, 30 pages. That doesn't mean I don't like novels. Of course, I love reading novels, but the idea of just a phenomenally written short story. And I used to teach community college and actually college in general, university, taught at a couple schools in New York before I moved out here to Los Angeles. And I always loved teaching short story classes because I just felt they were just very compact, very bite-sized. They could hold my students' attention, which was good. So a guy like Raymond Carver, who's written so many great short stories, he's long gone. But speaking of a great short story writer, I got to go with a guy, O. Henry, who wrote so many great American short stories. Of course, everyone knows Gift of the Magi, but he's got so many great sort of 20-minute stories that you can read, always with a great ending that you can't help but admire.
That's amazing. And what are your thoughts of some of today's writers, like J.K. Rowling or Stephen King, or any other popular writers today?
Well, Stephen King, I've always been a huge fan of. And one of the things I appreciate most about Stephen King is most people think of him as the horror guy. And of course, he's written some of the greatest horror things ever. I mean, look, he just had granted it's a movie, but everyone's anticipating the second part of It coming out in theaters. And I'm someone who can't stand clowns. So the fear of clowns is big on me. But when it comes to Stephen King, what I really appreciate is a lot of the stuff that he's written that's not horror material. One of the greatest things he's written is The Shawshank Redemption, which is a short story that was turned into an amazing movie. But he's got a short story collection called Different Seasons, and each short story is based on there's 4 short stories in it, each based on a different season. One is the short story that eventually became The Shawshank Redemption, which is not a horror at all. One is a short story called The Body, which later became the movie Stand By Me, which is another not horror movie, but just an amazing Stephen King movie. And then there's 2 others that touch in the horror genre. But I just love the fact that he's known to be the horror guy, but he gets out of that bubble to write about some really incredible stuff.
That is amazing too. And in terms of writing, after your project of Can't Give It Away on 7th Avenue, The Rolling Stones in New York City, now available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, what is your next writing project? What do you have planned coming up?
Well, actually, and I can't talk too much about it, but I can give you some details. I just turned into my publisher a second book about a different artist and his connection to Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
So that's one of the reasons why I'm out here in Los Angeles. Similar in the way that I explored the history of the Rolling Stones in New York City, I'm looking at a different artist who, unfortunately, I can't talk about yet.
That's fine.
But a different artist and his connection to Los Angeles. And it's interesting. Since I've written this book, a lot of people have said to me, "Well, what's next? Are you going to write about Billy Joel and Long Island, or Bruce Springsteen and the Jersey Shore?" And to me, I'm not that interested in that, because obviously, I feel most people have an inherent connection to the place they grew up. So Bruce Springsteen in Jersey doesn't really interest me. He could tell that story. But what interests me is a band like the Rolling Stones coming across the Atlantic. Totally different country, totally different atmosphere, and really finding a connection with New York City. So I wanted to find an artist who is not from Los Angeles, and how did that artist really make an impact on the community. Now, I don't think I'm going to keep writing books that have to do with artists in specific cities, but I'm happy to write about more music topics. So I'm glad that I've had those opportunities.
Well, that's great too. And also on the subject of blues, and this just came to mind, you talk about, New York blues, Chicago blues, a bit of Memphis blues, and of course you got the Los Angeles music scene. How about Texas blues, and what are your thoughts on that? It makes me think of ZZ Top, and of course you had the late Stevie Ray Vaughan, and whatever else. What are your thoughts on Texas blues?
Well, you mentioned ZZ Top, and I got to say that first of all, I have one great memory of when I was in New York City. I was walking quite late at night down in the Village, and I just walked past a guy, and he's got this long beard. He's got kind of this funky hat on, sunglasses, even though it's 9:00 at night. And I look at him, I go, "That's Billy Gibbons." There's one of those where you immediately know who the person was. And yeah, of course, it was Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top. I later found out he was going to a party. But again, it was just like you exactly knew who that was. ZZ Top, somebody asked me the other day, because when I was doing an interview about the Stones book, they talked about how the Stones have had, Brian Jones, he was kicked out of the band and died in 1969, and then Mick Taylor joined, and he left in 74, and then Ronnie Wood joined in 75, and talking about all of these changes that happens in bands. And they said, "Is there any band that you can think of that has never changed members?" And I immediately said ZZ Top. They've been the same 3 dudes since 1969, I think they formed.
It is 69. That's right.
Yeah, and they're still just doing what they do, playing there. I heard a great quote where Billy Gibbons once said, he goes, "We're the same 3 guys playing the same 3 chords," and which I thought was brilliant. And Texas is just such a great scene for music. And even nowadays, you look at like Austin, granted not the same scene that produced ZZ Top or Stevie Ray Vaughan, but you have so much great music coming out of Texas. And the blues, of course, found a great home right there. But it's a huge state, so you're going to have a lot of different music styles coming out of that state.
That is amazing too, and then hopefully you can cover that. We'll let you work in Los Angeles and everything else. And just a few more things before we wrap up here. We know you're a busy guy, and thanks for joining us as well too. You've been fantastic, by the way, Chris. Who do you consider your biggest influence in your writing career?
Oh, that's a tough question. Biggest influence on my writing career. It's going to sound outside of the box here, but I would have to go with my wife, who's actually a musician. Her name's Erin McAndrew, and a phenomenal musician. And I can say that because she's my wife. But she is just such a great songwriter in her own right. And whenever she writes a song that I think is phenomenal, I just want to write something because personally, I love music. I have no music talent. It just pushes me to write something on what I can do, which is write like a narrative. So it's almost like we have this very friendly rivalry. So I find her a big influence because she pushes me to do better because it's a competition, very, very friendly competition, but competition.
That is amazing. What's the best advice you can give to anybody right now?
I would just, we have this amazing platform now with social media and the internet that, people ask me how I got started as a writer. And a lot of people ask me that, of course, now that I've published this book, they all come up to, hey, I got an idea for a book. How did you get to that point? And I explained to them that it took a lot of practice. Writing is just like any other major skill. If you're a wood carver, you got to spend hours learning how to do it to reach the top of your skill. When you're a musician, you got to spend hours working on your instrument. When you are whatever it is, it's all that time. And writing is the same way. I look back on stuff that I've written 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, and sometimes I cringe because I go, ooh, I wasn't that good at that point. And I hope, even though I love this, Can't Give It Away on 7th Avenue, I love this book, I hope 5 years from now I look back and say, you know what, I could have done that better, because that's growth. That's growth as a writer, growth as an individual. So the only advice I would ever give to a writer is practice. Find any outlet you can that will give you the opportunity to practice your craft, and work with a great editor, because that editor will teach you the right and the wrong, because not everything you put on paper is going to be brilliant. In fact, a lot of it won't be brilliant. So It's good to have an editor to tell you, you know what, this is good, this is not so good, this is not good, but you can rework it, and this you just got to lose. So having a great editor is really helpful.
That is amazing too. And of course, just lastly here, tell us about your upcoming projects. Where can we find your book, Can't Give It Away on 7th Avenue with the Rolling Stones? What's the website? How do people contact you? And how can people reach you on social media? And how can they find your book?
Great. So I make it kind of easy on you. My social media and my website are chrismckitt.com, and on Twitter at Chris McKitt, ChrisMcKit. I also have an Instagram and a Twitter dedicated to the book, which is 7, the number 7, AVE Stones, 7th Ave Stones. So I've been, that's where you can see a lot of my information about my book, my upcoming projects. Really right now I'm focusing on this. I have a signing before the Stones concert in Pasadena on August 22nd. So I'm really excited to do that. But really, it's chrismckitt.com, and that has the links to my books on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I mean, it's in Barnes & Noble stores as well, and bookstores all over. But, everyone seems to go to Amazon these days, and of course, you can find it there.
That is amazing, too. And Chris, just want to say thank you very much for your time. You've been fantastic. I'm going to go out and get the book. And do us a favor, keep us up to date. Looking forward to having you on again soon. And like to wish you all the best. It's great to have you on. Look forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks for listening to The Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Listen online at themikewagnershow.com and on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And watch the interview on YouTube. Also, become a sponsor of the program or donate today at themikewagnershow.com. Join us again tomorrow for another episode of The Mike Wagner Show.